From the Volcker Alliance and the Penn Institute for Urban Research, this is Special Briefing. I'm Bill Glassell at the Alliance, and I'm here with my co-host at Penn IUR, Susan Walker. Hello, Susan.
Good morning, Bill.
How are you doing?
I'm good. We have a
Exciting
great
topic
panel ahead
today.
of us.
All right. Exciting topic, which is America's hot growth states, how they're benefiting, and the challenges they face. And joining us today is a very special guest, New Jersey Governor Phil Murphy. New Jersey was one of the surprises on the U.S. Census list of the top 10 fastest growing states from 2019 to 2023. It came in number 7 or number 8, depending how many decimal points you use in percentage terms. Anyway, it edged out South Carolina and was not that far behind Texas. But growth can be a mixed blessing. More jobs and tax revenue, to be sure, but also more demand for schools, highways, and public safety. Indeed, some growth states and cities are currently working to close budget shortfalls now that federal emergency pandemic aid is nearing an end. So we'll hear from Governor Murphy in just a moment. But first, this message. We're coming to you on the Volcker Alliance and Penn IUR websites, and also on this special briefing podcast. We've taken your questions in advance, and we'll get to them later in the program. And of course, this special briefing is made possible with the support of the Volcker Alliance, members of the Penn IUR Board of Advisors, and the Century Foundation. And now let's get back to the topic at hand. That's growth states. And kicking things off from New York with the big picture is our frequent panelist and friend, Chief Economist Torsten Slok of Apollo Global Management. We'll then have a discussion with Governor Murphy, and after the governor, we'll turn to the fastest growing state to get the skinny from Idaho, and that's Idaho Budget Director Alex Adams. Up next will be Municipal Market Analytics founder Tom Doe for the view from the Muni Market, and from Austin, Texas, where he hangs his Stetson most of the time these days. And finally, from Atlanta comes Professor Shatakshi Dongda of Georgia Tech with the scene in Atlanta and her perspective on education. Welcome to you all. And now, without further delay, Torsten, the floor is yours.
Thank you. So let's talk a bit about where we are in the macroeconomic cycle. So the big issue in macroeconomics is, of course, that the Federal Reserve began to raise interest rates in March of 2022. That process was playing out a bit slower than what many had expected, including me, because normally when you raise interest rates, you would expect consumers to slow down, firms to slow down, and therefore also tax revenue to slow down. But because consumers were so prepared for interest rate increases and firms were so prepared for interest rate increases, we had seen that firms had locked in lower levels of interest rates, consumers had locked in lower levels of interest rates. The implication was that it took a longer time for the economy to respond negatively to higher interest rates. And in the meantime, inflation came down very nicely. So that meant that in December, the Federal Reserve began to change their tone and saying, well, after 18 months of saying interest rates are going up, 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 they have now started to saying the next move in interest rates will be down. And that has, of course, unleashed some support to consumers from higher wealth effects, a higher stock market, higher home prices. So in the near term, we still have some issues about which of these forces are most dominating. Is it higher interest rates from the Fed slowing things down and still weighing on the economy? Or this new force of, yes, the Fed changed their tone from after having said interest rates are going up, 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 to now saying interest rates are about to go down. And that has created a very significant rally in the stock market. The S&P 500 is up 25% since November the 1st. That's adding about $10 trillion in wealth to consumers and to the economy. So the bottom line, Bill, on the big picture where we are at the moment is that it looks like, yes, inflation is under control, but interest rates are probably going to stay higher for a little while longer. And that means that for states, we still have more expensive financing costs, probably for a few more quarters, in my view, before the Federal Reserve will begin to lower interest rates. But the big picture is tax revenue is still good. And the big picture, because we still have a good economy, and the big picture is that interest rates higher for longer may also imply that inflation still needs a little while longer before it gets completely down to the Fed's 2% target. So the bottom line is it's actually a relatively good outlook where the economy continues to do quite well, but with this little caveat that the cost of borrowing will remain elevated probably for another 6 to 9 months.
So let me follow up, Torsten. Thank you for that excellent summary of what appears to be a very bullish outlook, certainly very bullish wealth creation, $10 trillion. And also, of course, home prices have gone up, according to Case-Shiller, 6 to 7%, which is major household wealth increasing dramatically as well, and faster than inflation. So with all of these positives, do you see interest rates, 10-year Treasury, staying elevated through 2025 as where they are now, or when will that start easing? It's one thing for the Fed to say we're going to ease, and the other thing is for markets to ease.
That's exactly right. And that's exactly the main discussion, of course, in financial markets, that yes, the Federal Reserve may say later this year or in maybe beginning of next year, but at some point in the next few quarters, the Federal Reserve may begin to lower short-term interest rates. But long-term interest rates are driven not only by what the Federal Reserve is doing, you also have that long-term interest rates are also driven, particularly at the moment, by significant levels of federal debt, meaning government debt levels and government issuance of treasuries along the yield curve is going to be very substantial over the next several quarters. You will see that the size of treasury auctions, here I'm talking about 3-year auction, 5-year, 7-year, 10-year, 30-year auctions, are going to increase on average by 35% over 2024 compared to 2023. So that means that, in other words, the answer to your question, Susan, is that yes, the Federal Reserve may lower short-term interest rates, but the risk is that the yield curve will steepen. In other words, the long-term interest rates may not come down as much because we now have such a significant supply of US Treasuries that needs to be absorbed. So that's why a very important conversation at the moment is exactly that, yes, the Fed may cut interest rates, but in the belly, meaning the 5-year and 10-year interest rates further out the yield curve, we may not see interest rates come down as much. So they may still be moved lower, but the risk is that we have such a significant level of government debt and treasury issuance that now is beginning to play a role in holding the level of interest rates in the 5, 7, 10-year segment at higher levels than what we've been used to before.
And if I may take that,
what does this mean? Sorry, Susan. What's this mean? What's this mean for housing?
well,
Especially,
Bill, if I may put a point on that, that's exactly where I was going. In particular, the mortgage rates are tied to the 10-year, and there is that mechanism that housing prices are positively affected, the supply shortage from the inventory lock-in, and the inventory lock-in is indeed tied to higher mortgage rates. So do we see any unraveling of this tight lock-in effect, which is keeping inflation through housing prices and rents up?
Yeah, I think that that is very important, and I completely agree that the lock-in effect, meaning that the fact that so many people are sitting at lower mortgage rates at 3 or 4%, and the mortgage rate, if you look at it today, is 6, 7, 8%. That means that a lot of people do not want to move. They want to sit tight. And they, exactly as you're saying, Susan, I completely agree. The implication is that we may see, therefore, a period which continues for now, where people are simply not buying a new home. They're simply not leaving, because why would I leave my 3% mortgage if the mortgage I have to get tomorrow will be a 7% mortgage? This is, of course, also very important when we've had this long, long period where people have not been buying homes. The population has been growing. We've had a significant increase in immigration, 5.5 million more people in the workforce that are born outside the US today relative to where we were in 2020, has created also significant increase in demand for housing. So we have this little bit unusual dynamic in the housing market, very little inventory of existing homes for sale. New homes for sale has been going up. But remember, for every 7 homes that are on the market, 6 are existing homes. 1 is a new home. So the vast majority of homes that are for sale are existing homes. And they are basically, because of the lock-in effect, as you're saying, they are basically not available because people are sitting tight and not willing to move. So the way I look at your question is, because of this lock-in effect, because of this lower supply of houses that are available and on the market, that does mean that home prices can actually continue to go up. At the moment, they're up 6.5% in the Case-Shiller year over year. And that does still provide wealth effects, still provide a lift to inflation. But the bottom line in that is that housing, and therefore revenue that states might get from property taxes, etc., still is actually doing quite well, because we have just not seen the negative effects, despite what the textbook would have predicted, the negative effects of mortgage rates going up as much as they did.
So what impact does this have on the growth states, where is or high housing price, you have high rising personal wealth, but high housing prices, relatively high mortgage rates. Does that keep people from moving to the Texases and the Arizonas and the Idahos of this world?
We have nevertheless, of course, as you know, all too well, seen quite significant migration to the high growth states. And that's, of course, the good news is that we should expect to see households move around to the places where the high growth is. That being said, the lock-in effect is certainly creating some challenges where people leave. Let's say you lived in the Midwest and moved to Texas. And if you leave a 3% mortgage and you need to move to Texas where home prices are high, and you now need a 7% mortgage, that will certainly have an impact on your personal finances. So it is the case that the lock-in effect is, in some sense, in conflict here with the desire and the migration moves that we have seen in such a strong, significant way. It is all being helped by immigration that, again, has played a very significant role in the last few years. Again, more than 5 million people being added to the labor force is helping because they came from outside the US and did come and buy a home, but they also buy homes at higher levels of mortgage rates. So there's a lot of forces at play, but the conclusion still is that we've still nevertheless seen the net effect of quite significant migration into the high growth states.
And there is general macro growth, which is stronger than what was from last year. So tell us your forecast on macro growth.
Absolutely. So today the unemployment rate is 3.9. The unemployment rate bottomed at 3.4. So you could begin to look at that and say, okay, the unemployment rate has gone up 0.5% from 3.4 to 3.9. That's a little bit worrying when you think about tax revenue. That's a little bit worrying when you think about even both high growth states and low growth states. But nevertheless, 3.9% unemployment is still very, very low by any historical standard. And the Fed's own measure of where the unemployment rate will be in the long run is 4.3. So I know that's a lot of different numbers, but that's just saying we're still at a very low unemployment rate. Yes, it's gone up a bit, but we're just not quite even there where we would expect it to be in the long run. So it still speaks to this broader narrative that we are coming to the conclusion here that the economy is actually still doing quite well. It's helped a lot by stock prices going up and home prices going up and even Bitcoin prices going up. But all those things are helping keeping the economy afloat and helping keeping both low growth states and high growth states in terms of tax revenue still being reasonably solid.
Well, Torsten, we'll be back to you after we hear from other panelists for more questions and what are the implications for the growth states and the not so fast growing states. But I believe that the governor will be joining us shortly. Bill, do you want to introduce the governor?
Absolutely. Thank you, Susan. Thank you, Torsten. Stay with us. Is Governor Murphy on the line, Graham? Let's.
Hi, the governor will be here shortly.
Very good. Well, I'm going to do a little introduction, and hopefully he'll be with us from Trenton in a moment. Phil Murphy is in his second term as governor of the Garden State, which has bounced back from the Great Recession, the COVID-19 pandemic, and more. The governor has won praise for his efforts to stabilize New Jersey's pension gap and budget, and for his efforts, the state won 6 upgrades from Wall Street bond rating firms since 2022. Good morning, Governor.
Hey, Bill, good morning. Sorry, I hope I'm not late here.
No,
Not at all.
Hello,
we were
Governor.
just getting to.
Hey, Susan.
We were just getting to the number of bond rating upgrades. Jersey has won since 22, which I think is 6, if that's correct.
7.
7. Okay, I'm close. Phil Murphy was also a longtime admirer and friend of 2 of the Volcker Alliance's founding members, the late Federal Reserve Chairman Paul Volcker, of course, and his best buddy, the late and legendary Dick Ravitch, who was also a fellow at Penn IUR. The governor very eloquently eulogized Dick at his tragic funeral last year. So, Governor, welcome back to our stage, and tell us, please, why Jersey's been on a growth spurt.
Bill and Susan, thanks for having me back. And I also want to give Alex Adams a shout out, who's on for my friend Idaho Governor Brad Little's team. Honored to be with you and thrilled to be back. And I love the Penn. I have a degree from Penn, and I love this program. And Bill and I go back to Volcker and Ravitch and others. So it's great for all those reasons. Great to be here.
Thank you.
Listen, the one fear I have when you take a victory lap is a former colleague of mine at Goldman Sachs who was an economist who got a very difficult prediction or projection rather exactly right. I said, Bob, that is incredible. You must feel great. He said, in this line of business, peacock one day, feather duster the next. So I don't want to tear my rotator cuff patting ourselves on the back, but I think the principal reason, Bill, is we got elected basically on a three-legged stool to fix the state. One leg was to grow the economy, and we've added, 60,000 small businesses. We've increased our union labor by 60,000 only in the past year. So we're proving you could be both pro-business and pro-worker. The second piece of it was to address shocking inequities. I'm proud of a lot of the things we've done, most recently in affordable housing, criminal justice reform, voting reform. We've made a lot of progress. We still have a long way to go. And the third piece, which I think is the most relevant for our discussion, is to become again a state that is responsible and that people can trust. And so I'll give you one data point. When we got into office 6.5 years ago, New Jersey, when you added up pension, unfunded pension deficit, unfunded healthcare deficit, and outstanding indebtedness, when you added those three together, it was $240 billion. That has now shrunk to $180 billion. We just met with the rating agencies a week and a half ago, and I said, and they agreed, we went from the absolute bottom of the class to the middle of the pack. Middle of the pack, in my humble opinion, is not acceptable. We have to continue to make progress on those fronts. And so that's the third leg of the stool. I'd make one other comment on the first leg, which is growing the economy. The one thing I would pound my chest a little bit on is that we have both reinvested in the industries that brought us to the dance, pharmaceutical, bio, life science, tech, telecom, to pick sectors that New Jersey's always been strong in. And we have unleashed new industries, film, television, digital, offshore wind and the green economy, adult use cannabis. And most recently, we put a significant marker down, the flagship element of which is a joint venture with Princeton University on generative artificial intelligence. We believe we have a real shot to be sort of the East Coast analog to the what is now ground zero in the Bay Area. And then lastly, we play well around the world. And so we just got back from a Far East Asia trip to Japan, South Korea, Taiwan. Before that, we've done Germany, Israel, India, Ireland, and a little bit of France. We play well internationally. When I pitch the place, I use two words, talent and location. And that's the last point I will make. No matter you're a Democrat or a Republican, historically, when New Jersey invested aggressively in talent and location, it did well. And when it didn't, it did poorly. And it's really not a political ideology. It's play the hand that you were dealt. And that's what I hope that we can continue doing over the next year and a half plus in our time in office. With that, I'll send it back over to you all.
Thank you, Governor. That's beautiful. Can you tell us more? I love that talent and location, because once you've got it and you grow it, that puts you in a very good competitive position going forward. Can you give us more on how you have deployed and taken advantage where you are to further this?
Yeah, you bet, Susan. So it's largely investing aggressively at the highest levels in the nation in education. Everything from expanding on a journey toward universal pre-K, funding fully, unlike any other state, per capita K through 12, making higher education, both a community college and four-year schools, more accessible and affordable, investing in the nexus between research at those higher ed institutions and commercial development, particularly in the startup community. New Jersey had, before we got here, had done a pretty good job through thick and thin, holding on to the big companies. It had done, I'd say, a poor job in refreshing post Bell Labs or post the AT&T Bell Labs days, refreshing the startup community. I'd also say workforce development programs and working with unions and embracing diversity. That's how I would round out talent. On location, it's fairly straightforward. It's record levels of infrastructure investment, both via the state as well as taking full advantage of the federal dollars. We have the Gateway Hudson Tunnel project underway at long last. That's the largest infrastructure project in America. I want to thank the Biden administration and the Trump administration before that for working with us. We just signed the reauthorization of our transportation trust fund the other day. That's state level money. So talent is all in investment, and location is all in infrastructure investment. Those are the two, I think, levers that we pull the most.
May I ask a follow-up, Governor? You mentioned the transportation measure that you signed. Talk to us a little bit more about that. NJ Transit has been looking for a more durable source of funding to get people back and forth. NJ Transit's been very affected by work from home, as every mass transit system. But you've also signed a new affordable housing reform package. How does transportation and housing how do that play into to keeping the state growing?
Yeah, I mean, both great questions, and neither of those without their challenges. So specific to NJ Transit, when we inherited a state that was kind of wrecked, NJ Transit was the wreck within the wreck. So we had to get that as an operational matter back up on its feet. And we've spent 6 years without raising fares, just doggedly hiring more engineers, replenishing the capital stock, making the system more reliable on both bus and train, more reliable, safer, more on time. And we're not completely finished by a long shot, but it is a dramatically improved operation today relative to the 6+ years before we got here. Its final weakness, if you will, is the fiscal piece of this. And Bill, as you rightfully point out, it is particularly relevant post-pandemic. And they're not unique. The MTA in New York City is in the hole for $1 billion something. NJ Transit is in the hole for something less than that, but still significant. So we have taken, we proposed at least a corporate transit fee to dedicated, I say in quotes because it's not constitutionally dedicated, but with the proceeds overwhelmingly going toward NJ Transit. That was sort of the final piece. And that's until NJ Transit ultimately gets back on its feet again. And I have no doubt in my mind it will, but that will be after we're gone. Housing is a tale of two cities. Last week, a report came out of the top 100 hottest real estate markets for single family homes in America. New Jersey has 25. 4 of the top 10, 10 of the top 25. So at one level, that's a really good sign that people want to come into New Jersey. And I don't make light of that. On the other hand, to your good question, it exacerbates an already existing and challenging lack of affordable housing units. I signed a landmark bill a couple of weeks ago that will go a long way toward solving that. But Bill, most experts believe that Jersey is plus or minus 200,000 units shy of where it needs to be on the affordable housing front. So I'm thrilled that people want to be here. It's a badge of honor and it validates a lot of what we're doing, but let's not ignore the fact that it makes it even more challenging on the affordable housing front.
And if I can follow up on that, it's particularly, I suppose, workforce housing, the missing middle. And can you tell us what you're hoping to accomplish in that direction?
Well, the affordable housing bill is going to be a big step in the right direction because that has been since the famous Mount Laurel doctrine in New Jersey, which has had nationwide significance. It's been battled through over the past 10 years, and particularly in the courts. This is going to set a process in place which will make it a lot more transparent, faster, frankly, and more equitable. But we need, Susan, we need more than that. And we're working with local municipalities, with our counties. We're putting monies into helping folks afford first-time home buyers. We've got a big program on that front. We just need to build more housing stock. And, you know, if you look at where the incremental uptick in the economy is right now, it's across the board, but we think we've got particular upside in South Jersey. And we have a lot less density in South Jersey. Jersey is the most densely populated state in America, but South Jersey is a lot less densely populated than Central and Northern Jersey. When you look at the offshore wind industry, gaming, which is booming, the renaissance of Camden, the potential for hydrogen energy as a nexus in South Jersey, the potential for the big data warehouses that are associated with generative artificial intelligence. The nuclear power plants in South Jersey have a good case to make to power those energy heavy warehouses. When you add all that up, there should be, not just during my time, but beyond, there should be good upside opportunity for a better than trend, higher than trend, build out of workforce housing. And that would be my hope.
Yeah, people don't often realize that New Jersey is unique in that it really is two states, North and South, and in terms of development.
And now build the center if the governor wanted to.
There's a lot of room left. I wanted to ask you just a quick last question, perhaps. We started this off talking about the bond upgrades. You know, New Jersey was actually the second best performing bonds on the municipal market from 2019 to 23. It's partly because it used to be relatively low rated and you paid more for it, but people did stick with the credit. So what's the outlook for Jersey? How do you keep those seven upgrades in place?
Good question. Before I answer, Bill, don't confuse with an Eagles fan in South Jersey with any of the Jets or Giants fans in the North to put a finer point on that, right? It's two different worlds in that respect, but one great state. Listen, we have to stay at it. We have to keep making our pension payments. And by the way, if you want to be depressed, get this data point. We proposed for the fourth year in a row, full pension payment. It will be $7.15 billion in one budget year. Before the 4 in a row full payments, there have been 25 years of either less than full or no payments. Had the state made the full payment for those 25 years, that 7.15 would be $1.1 billion. So our single year penalty in one budget for past bad behavior on both sides of the aisle, by the way, is over $6 billion, which takes your breath away. But we have to stay at that. We have to continue to reduce our outstanding indebtedness, where we've made a lot of really good progress. We need to, likewise, on the health benefit side, continue to be vigilant. The one challenge we have right now, and it's conscious, but we have to make sure that when we walk out of here in a year and a half plus, we've addressed it. And that is, we are deliberately running a structural deficit right now, which you could do temporarily, but you can't do, as you all know, at the state level, where you're constitutionally required to sign a balanced budget. You can't do what Washington has done. And for folks who may not be plugged in, I know Bill and Susan are, Washington hasn't had a balanced budget in close to 30 years. You keep kicking the can down the road in Washington, indebtedness keeps going up. That can't happen at the state level. It certainly can't happen in Jersey. So that's the one, within the budget context, that's the one to solve for challenge before us over the next year and a half plus. I'm confident, but I want to make sure we do to at least continue with a stable, if not a further improved credit environment.
Well, on that note, thank you very much, Governor Murphy. It's been a pleasure for both of us as a friend of the Alliance and an alumnus and friend of Penn. We really appreciate you joining us today, and we hope you'll be able to do it again sometime. So
yeah, I definitely do, Bill and Susan, and I thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Governor. And it's now our
Governor.
pleasure after we
Thank you, guys.
Governor, thank you so much again. From the fastest growing state in the East Coast to the moving on to the fastest growing state in the country. And it's our pleasure to welcome Alex Adams. Alex Adams, who is the state budget director for the state of Utah. Alex, you might be on mute. Is that possible? There you go.
There you are.
Hi, Susan. And just a correction for the great state of Idaho, which
Oh, did I say the wrong state? I'm so bemused by New Jersey. The great state, and I know that, the great state of Idaho. Thank you.
work very closely with our friends and colleagues in Utah, but we're also proud of what we're doing here in Idaho.
Yes, and you are the fastest growing state. Idaho is, yes, indeed.
Yeah, population-wise, fastest growing since 2010. And what I thought I'd do is I'd start off with some of the numbers just to give you the extent of how we're growing, and then talk a little bit about why we're growing, and then how we're responding as a state, specifically some of the priorities we brought to the legislature this year. So fastest growing since 2010. And we saw a spike during COVID. In fiscal year 2020, we saw 3% population growth. Fiscal year 21, we saw 2.6% population growth. Next year, 1.6%. And then last year, 1.3% growth. So pretty significant growth. It is that growth rate is tapering off, but still among the highest in the nation. Why are we growing? A lot of it is we are a low regulation state. Mercatus ranks us as the least regulated state in the country. We're also a low taxation state. We recently adopted a flat tax and have lowered our rate 4 times in the last 4 years. Stable financially. We were recently upgraded to a AAA credit rating, both by Fitch as well as Moody's. And then there's all those intangible benefits and tangible benefits of Idaho. We have access to outdoor recreation, beautiful lakes, mountains, access to skiing, things that were really rejuvenated for many people during COVID. And we also have a low cost of living relative to some states. I used to be able to say relative to many states, but now I have to say relative to some states for the same reason that Governor Murphy said. When you have the type of growth we're seeing, it does exacerbate housing markets, rents, and things like that. A couple of the other reasons we're growing is we are seeing several major construction projects. Micron has a major facility in Boise, and under the CHIPS Act, they are undergoing a major expansion that is anticipated to bring 17,000 jobs to the Boise Valley. And we're seeing major expansions of some of our health systems and other projects. So just for comparison, Idaho has a much larger share of construction employment than other fast-growing states. So a lot of our economic potential is still being developed. Just for comparison, we have 7.7% of is our share of construction employment. U.S. is 5.2% and higher than other fast-growing states. The other thing that's unique is when we look at who is moving here, we have quite a bit of data that shows that the adjusted gross income per individual moving here far exceeds the native population and also exceeds who's moving out. So we are seeing that from a state budget perspective and higher income tax collections, higher corporate income tax collections. Then you also see it in a higher sales tax collection. So we've seen a large growth in revenue in recent years, and in the current fiscal year, we are exceeding our forecast once again by, I believe, 4.8%. So with growth comes challenges. In previous Volcker webinars, I've talked a little bit about what we're doing on the infrastructure side with investments in roads, bridges, air, rail, clearing out the deferred maintenance backlog on state buildings. What I'll focus briefly on here is 2 of the priorities we brought to the legislature this year. One, with the growth in employers and the growth of jobs in Idaho, we want a stable pipeline of talent to fill those jobs. So we secured, or we passed a bill last session, and we are on the brink of securing funding, hopefully before this legislature wraps up, full funding for a program called Idaho Launch, which is available to high school graduates. If you graduate from an Idaho high school, you have $8,000 available to you that you can use for any post-secondary program. And what was really important about this is you can't just, it's not just for 4 years or community colleges. You can use it for industry credentials or certification programs or apprenticeships. So it can be a pathway for linemen. It can be a pathway for those who want to pursue a CDL. And what we're trying to do is ensure that we have a go-on rate above 60%, 60% of our graduates going on to post-secondary so that we can fill those jobs that are in demand for Idaho businesses. The other priority this session was we do have a significant backlog of funding for school facilities. So the buildings and the learning environment that our students learn in makes a big difference on their educational outcomes. And because of the population growth and growth in our K-12 system, we're trying to pivot from a system that was funded fully on property taxes to something that has state support. So we did devote a portion of our sales tax annually to bond at the state level for school facilities. We'll generate $1 billion bond with a 10-year maturity, and every 10 years infuse $1 billion into school facilities, primarily for the educational buildings, not their athletic facilities. So those are some of the priorities and how we're addressing them, and look forward to a robust Q&A. Thank you for
Alex,
having
let
me.
me just follow on. In earlier, we were talking that Idaho has no debt. Is that correct? Just
well, we paid off all debt in our estate building program. We do have some transportation bonds. We bond off of, like many states, federal transportation funds, and not all of those were callable, but all state building debt that was in our state's bond payment program, we have paid those off.
which is very helpful for keeping your borrowing costs down and being able to support these other initiatives. Thank you so much. And Alex Adams will be, of course, staying on for the Q&A. With that, back to you, Bill.
Thank you. Thank you. And this is a reminder that you're tuned into special briefing from the Volcker Alliance and Penn IUR. The archived editions of all of these special briefings are on our websites and the special briefing podcast. And now let's go to Austin and Tom Doe. He watches the MMA has a long association with the Volcker Alliance ever since we started. You've been our consultant on public finance activities, and now we're turning to you to tell us about Texas and some of the challenges of growth.
Well, Bill and Susan, thank you so much for having me. I think what hearing the governor speak about New Jersey's growth and seeing the increase in population as well as a robust economy starts to say, well, maybe Texas' best days are now behind it. And I think the interesting element of growth is, of course, strains on infrastructure. And it's interesting to note that in 2015, Texas issued approximately about $47 billion in debt, and this past year was up to $57 billion. So we're looking at a 21% increase in new debt that was created in order to deal with some of the infrastructure stresses. We often talk about housing, we often talk about education when we talk about growth, but we're also seeing the strains on, of course, the energy. Texas, the grid, the vulnerability of the grid is well known. The wildfires out west this past winter, 1 million acres burned, and of course a relatively light population area, but nonetheless a reminder of just how fragile the climate is down here. But these strains of growth are apparent, again, on the grid, not just when we think, typically about are the lights going to be on and this type of thing, but what we're seeing is that with the volatility of the weather, both extreme cold and extreme heat are really starting to tax this new population that has come into Texas in the last 5 years. And now, anecdotally, what now is being experienced is that people who are no longer want to be full-time residents certainly in the Austin area, which has been one of the hottest cities in the country, no pun intended. But it is now starting to reverse. People do not want to be here in the summer. Last year, record number of consecutive days over 100 degrees. And that's straining now the electricity grid now in the summertime with the demands on AC. The chip manufacturing that was drawn to the state is a great consumer of water. In conversations with the San Antonio Water Authority, his concern is, well, he's always concerned about, is there enough water? But his real concern now is also, do I have the power to move the water to where people want it? We're seeing commercial properties that are like many cities across the country are vacant, and with no real plans of either to move people back in. And we all know that the conversion of a corporate building to residential is extraordinarily costly and difficult. So there's a lot of idle properties. On the residential side here in Austin, listings have increased by 44% over last year. So there now is a glut. We're now a buyer's market in Austin, and with towers going up. In fact, out from where I'm speaking right now, there are 7 new towers that will be over 50 stories high that are for luxury condominiums. So when we talk about affordable housing, it is not these towers, and this is also putting a strain on the economy. Then we, of course, have transportation. Austin here, again, sorry to be so Austin-centric, but it's what I can see and walk in, what I see every day. But is I-35, a major corridor in the city, is about to embark on a $6 billion widening project. And whether that solves the congestion problem, I would be highly skeptical. I'm also skeptical that $6 billion will be the final number when all said and done. And that's a combination of state and federal funding. So we're seeing the strains. The growth is wonderful, but we all know that growth during the pandemic was driven by appeal of climate that was attractive, but also we are seeing that the absence of an income tax. Believe me, there are taxes in Texas. So I can tell you from my property tax bill, which is just extraordinary, and it is something here where those appeals, people are starting to understand that income tax isn't everything. And again, the growth states of Florida, of Arizona, of Texas. Again, climate is and Bill, climate is a big theme for me. I'm convinced that we are going to see, just as I mentioned anecdotally about Austin, that the growth states that have occurred in the last 5 years are poised to reverse. And maybe we're seeing a little bit of that with New Jersey's rise. Now, I also know that New Jersey has some vulnerability regarding their grid and regarding their climate. There's some of their highest properties on I think was it Long Beach Island, are very vulnerable to rising seas. And so there's going to be, I think, some stresses that states are going to have to incorporate in their budgets. We talk a lot, as the governor did, about pensions, but here in Texas, there's also going to be increased costs because of a changing climate, whether it's be electricity, water, that are going to be necessary, or the airport tarmac or highways is just start taking abuse from this extraordinarily volatile weather conditions that are now being commonplace. So with that, I'll leave it to you.
Well, thank you very much, Bill.
Yeah. Stick around for the discussion. We're going to turn right away because time is a little short to Professor Shatakshi Dongda. She's an associate professor at Georgia Tech with specialties in education, health, housing, inequality, sustainable development. All of these are big issues for Atlanta, Metro Atlanta, and Georgia in general. So tell us how it's playing out outside your window in Atlanta right now.
Thank you, Bill, and thank you, Susan, for inviting me on this panel. I will give you a sunny outlook, looking at my window outside, about Atlanta and Georgia's economy. We had a recent report by the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta which came out and showed that the Southeast region, which consists of Alabama, Florida, Georgia, Louisiana, Mississippi, and Tennessee, that region grew around 0.2 percentage points per year faster than the United States in most major metrics of economic performance. And one of the key contributors in that report of economic growth was the rising population growth. So I'm going to talk a bit about population growth in Georgia. The census data shows that Georgia's population surged in 2022, growing by 1% or about 3 times faster than the US population. In 2023, the state's population crossed the 11 million mark, and Georgia is right now the 8th most populous state in the country. In 2023, additionally, about 116,000 people were added to the population, and that was the 4th largest in the country behind North Carolina, Florida, and Texas. So what is the key driver of this population growth? And our attention quickly goes to migration, and I'm going to talk a bit about migration. That Georgia has seen an above average net migration in the state. We had more than almost 327,000 residents arrive in the state, and a net gain of 74,000 in 2023. Most of these folks migrated from Florida. You would be surprised to know that I think nearly 52,000 people migrated from the state of Florida to Georgia. Of course, we gained some people from the neighboring states as well, from North Carolina as well as Alabama. But from faraway states, we got about 25,000 migrants from California and about 24,000 from Texas. So that shows sort of the inflow of where this population growth is happening and how that is moving the economy forward. If I'm to zoom in into Atlanta, for instance, I'm looking at the recent ARC 2023 report. And I see, for instance, that the young adult population, which grew in the city in 2022, we had about 45,000 young adults. And this is an important group because that's the age group of, say, 16 to 26 years old who are seeking employment, who are driving the economic growth. This is much larger, the 45,000 young adults that we received in Atlanta compared to the national average of 33,000 on average. And this is comparable to the young adult migration in cities like Dallas, Nashville, and San Francisco. Though the composition of the young adults who migrated to Atlanta is very distinct, 80% of these young adults belong to the Black population. For other cities, it was a majority of the white population. But if you zoom into Atlanta, you'll see that the labor force with bachelor's degrees or higher is about 57 to 58% in Atlanta compared to Georgia's 33%. So that is sort of what is making Atlanta stand out, even within the state, how the economy is getting driven. Quickly, a bit about other factors besides population, about why they are seeing a big economic growth in the state. We are looking at strong financial position of households. Since the pandemic, household saving levels have remained elevated in the state. We are also seeing a lot of spending by the state government. Georgia is expanding its role as a regional and national logistics and distribution center. There was recent capacity additions by the Georgia Ports Authority. There was a report by the University of Georgia which shed light into growth in manufacturing. Electric vehicles are a large part now, and companies like Kia, Hyundai, and Rivian are building large facilities in the state. Part of the investment which is coming domestically is coming out of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, as well as the Inflation Reduction Act. But we are also seeing a lot of international investment. Georgia currently ranks 7th among the states in total foreign direct investment project dollars. So that sort of is driving on the investment in the state. In terms of what are the different sectors besides growth in manufacturing, the defense sector in the state Georgia has the 5th largest employment coming from the Department of Defense. its film industry, you may have heard, is spending or is rising, and it's spending about $4.4 billion every year. That's another record for the state. And we have seen a surge in the number of Fortune 1000 headquarters companies in Metro Atlanta from, say, about 25 to more than 30 after the pandemic. So there is a big pull towards growing employment, growing manufacturing, as well as investment. Bill, as you know, my research is focused, and you mentioned that, on the multiple dimensions of poverty. And I do look at the larger picture and look at housing and education and so on. And that is sort of the note I want to end my talk, is that despite the fast growth in the last few years, Georgia has seen a higher than average poverty rates in the state. We have seen them decline, but we are still greater than the national average. Our poverty rate in the state is about 12.5% in 2022. And multidimensional poverty measures, which I work on and estimate, are also higher than average. And that is something where we do want to make some progress in terms of housing affordability, in terms of public sector education and transportation and so on, which my panelists have already mentioned. So,
thank you so much, Professor. I have a broad question for all of our panelists. As the we beyond the post-COVID economy, perhaps into a new economy, what do you see the long-term drivers, 5, 10 years, let's say, out? Maybe somewhat shorter if that's too long. Is it logistics, manufacturing? We hear more about on nearshoring manufacturing. Is it the new knowledge, artificial intelligence, et cetera? Broadly, nationally, perhaps you can start us off, Torsten, and then we can go perhaps to Alex for the Idaho look at this.
Yeah, so I mean, the macro perspective of this is certainly that these are all things that could potentially play a very important role. There's still a lot of uncertainty about AI, but it is providing a lot of promise for what we can get in terms of growth. There's a lot of uncertainty about what the magnitude will be of these effects, but let's just agree that the net effect is certainly going to be positive, and that should be good also, therefore, for the broader economy and for the faster growing states. All these issues about attracting investment, attracting the tech firms, all these things, this is certainly a very important and notably very significant development for the US that we're just not quite seeing really almost anywhere in the world. So this is certainly something that is potentially a significant upside risk.
Alex, what do you see in terms of the job growth going forward?
Well, in terms of job growth, part of the conversation was on AI. I don't know that I can speak directly to that in Idaho.
What about manufacturing, and where is the job growth in Idaho?
Well, a lot of it right now, I talked about the Micron project, semiconductor engineering. We've had a lot of engineering firms move into the state. We've had a lot of tech firms moving here, and it goes back to that recipe I talked about earlier: low regulation, stable finances, and low taxes for both individuals and corporate.
Thank you. That's great. Tom, what do you see? Is it different in the energy? But of course, Texas is more than energy now.
Well, I mean, I just think that we have this addiction to electricity, and so how we produce it and how whether we can somehow curb some of the consumption of it is going to be really, I think, a big driver. I think it's going to be one of the more expensive commodities going forward, along with that with water. So, chip plant's great, but it consumes 300,000 households, water usage, each day. So, it's great that Micron's in Idaho. I'm a little concerned when it's in Maricopa County in Arizona. But I think we're going to see a lot of debt that's going to be issued by state and local governments to deal with some of the shortfalls that I think are going to be climate related and infrastructure stress. And, our firm, we're projecting in 2030s that annual municipal issuance could increase by 100% like it did in the 1970s and 1980s.
So that municipal will expand, particularly for, but you were saying that municipal debt will expand, and for what infrastructure particularly? Is this
handling stormwater, cooling HVAC upgrades in schools and in healthcare institutions, roads, etc.
So let me jump off of that, and then I'll turn it back to you, Bill. And this was so clear in your other points. Thank you for that as well, Tom. Of the importance potentially of the climate challenges going forward, particularly for some of the southern growth states and drier states. So I'm going to start again with Torsten. How do you see the challenges of climate change and the water resource and the wildfires and the arid conditions? Do you see this having impact in the way you're thinking about growth across the country? And then let's go also to Professor Dongda on this as well as Tom. Go ahead, Torsten.
Yeah, the quick response to that is that it is certainly something that, and there's a number of studies that have tried to quantify the negative effects. So the negative thing is, of course, what it will do in terms of holding growth back. Just thinking in terms of the broadest macroeconomic way, if I think about what is production in the economy, it is capital and labor and how well capital and labor work together. And if we suddenly have all these challenges with climate change that makes it harder for capital and labor to work together, that may have a negative impact, not only on how much capital and labor we can add, but also on productivity and how capital and labor together can create growth. So the initial effect would certainly be that it has some negative implications. The silver lining, of course, here is that if we do the right policies, if we do the right investments, it will have a positive effect. So there is almost a small race here where, yes, it will have negative effects if we don't do anything. But if we do the right things, it could have significant positive effects, in particular the energy transition, especially getting as much tailwind as it has at the moment. So it's a little bit mixed on the growth outlook. But the bottom line is that it is certainly something where the politicians globally, and of course, including in the US, have done and continue to do and continue to focus on, that this is something that needs to be tackled. And if done the right way, it could be a tailwind to economic growth.
Yeah, and don't forget what Tom just mentioned about their projection on the muni bond market doubling. The muni bond market is $4 trillion right now. So if issuance doubles, or if the size of the market doubles, whatever it is, that money is not going into the ocean. That money is literally, a lot of that is going into the ground. It's going to create jobs, and it's also going to create returns for investors. So there's a positive impact to all this work that's needed.
And stay tuned. We are in our next session going to delve into the water challenges going forward. Perhaps we should give Professor Dongda some time to talk about her perspective, and perhaps more generally perspective on equity and growth.
Thank you, Susan. Yes, we are seeing economic growth and rapid economic growth. And as I mentioned earlier, that is coming partly driven by the migration that we are seeing, but that also raises some concerns in terms of equity. And that is where I think the state will be paying attention. Even the city of Atlanta and Mayor Dickens has several policies towards making sure that the growth is equitably shared in the city. We are seeing in some parts, we are having gentrification like many of the major cities in the country, and we want to make sure that there is
perhaps
affordable housing available. There is something as the suburbanization of the poor, where they lack transportation access once they are pushed out of the city centers, and that creates a lot of equity issues, and that is something we need to address. Again, the mayor has tried to, we just had a press conference by him 2 days back, where he's adding more rail stations for people to get connected to the Beltline and easier commute. But those would be the parts where the state and the city will have to focus in order to make sure that this growth does not exacerbate the existing inequalities, but in fact is passed on more equitable across the population.
And we as a nation will need to focus on these issues as well. And so we'll be back to all of you on these issues and others. And for now, let me turn this to Bill to close us down.
Well, thank you. As much as I'd like to continue this discussion for the next hour, we are just about out of time. So that's it for this edition of Special Briefing. Graham or Noah, could you please put up the contact slide? We're going to put some contacts up on the screen. If those of you in the audience would like to get in touch with any of the speakers, the contacts should be up on the screen, and they'll also be on our website as well. There it goes. So there's all our great speakers. If you want to get in touch, here it is, or you can pick this up on the replay. But it's available. It'll be available to you on the website in a few minutes. And as I said, that's it for this edition. Thanks so much to Susan Wachter, to Governor Murphy, of course, and to Alex Adams and Chatakshi Dongda, and to Tom Doe. Thanks also to the Volcker Alliance, members of the Penn IUR Board of Advisors, and the Century Foundation. And of course, thanks to the folks behind the mic, Graham Dowd, Noah Ritzenberg, and Arden Jordan. And very special thanks to you, our audience, for joining Special Briefing today. As Susan mentioned, we'll be back on April 25th, Thursday, April 25th, with an Earth Week focus on water. So watch our websites and your email for details. And remember to catch up on this and all of our other special briefings on our podcast. So for now, I'm Bill Glassell with Susan Wachter, and we'll see you in April.